How's China easing its stance?
Well, first of all, it goes against the backdrop of what the IMF is also warning at these spring meetings, that global debt levels are rising, led by increasing debt in the United States and China, that the GDP ratio, the debt to GDP ratio globally could rise within 5 years to those record levels we saw because of the pandemic response in 2020. And that, fiscal buffers need to be boosted, is what the IMF is warning. That being said, there's this other debate that's going on, and we have the top leaders, whether it's Yi Gang, David Malpass, Kristalina Georgieva, or also Janet Yellen. They're in these talks to try and unlock some much-needed aid to the poorer nations, some of whom have defaulted, obviously, like Zambia and the likes. And Zambia officials were in these meetings in Washington at the IMF and World Bank meetings, as was representatives of the G20 hosts, India, to try and get this deadlock broken on getting China to essentially pull back on its demands. China is demanding that multilateral development banks take as much of a haircut as, say, China.
Yep.
Because China is the biggest bilateral lender to the poorer nations. And essentially, David Malpass at the World Bank is saying, we have a proposal out there, and I'll basically outline it. The World Bank would provide fresh, low-interest concessional loans and grants to these nations that have defaulted. I mentioned Zambia as one, in exchange for China dropping a key demand that multilateral banks take losses alongside other creditors in debt restructurings. Well, China, according to sources, is starting to back off on that demand, but it's still unclear whether they're going to make that complete concession.
So what do you rate the chances of a major breakthrough then?
Yeah, well, sources, again, are telling us, and also leaders who are involved in these talks, essentially saying they're not expecting a major breakthrough because, again, China's position is still at this moment unclear. Georgieva, just a couple of days ago, speaking to Bloomberg News, said, China has been very slow to recognize that multilateral debt restructuring requires China to play by the rules that are already established. Now, China has responded to those kinds of allegations as well to say, to truly solve the debt problem, all parties need to implement the principle of joint action and fair burden. So it's a long-standing roadblock that has to be overcome if they're going to get this much-needed aid to these defaulted nations in the poorer parts of the world. But again, it's geopolitics and diplomatic issues at play here, and China seems a bit cornered.